The community, so we're going to experiment and see if people want to come back and chew on things which you thought of here. There'll be a light lunch served, turkey sandwiches, and on the long haul there's always childcare available for these sessions, although we tend to attract the people without younger children because it's hard enough to get ourselves out at 9 in the morning, let alone get some 12-year-olds out of it. So, but childcare is available. The caveat here, this is not this old house in Ithaca. When Sue and I talked about this session, she said whenever she talks about the neighborhood and the way she's done it, some of the questions come up about what kind of furnace did you use, what kind of insulation. We're here today to talk about the new, say, a new model of the way the housing should go. If you've got questions on that kind of construction stuff, Sue is a builder. She charges for that. We could have another session on that, but we want to talk today about what's different about this footprint, this sustainability. So, Sue, and I'll keep track of questions as we go, so we don't have to stop and answer them.
So, thanks Fred, thanks Bob, and thank you all for being here. This is really pretty amazing, 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm really impressed. I really look forward to hearing what got you here, piqued your interest, and I'll just launch into the presentation. So, my name is Sue Cosentini, and my company, I have sort of 3 entities. One is Cosentini Construction, and Cosentini Construction has really been around for 30 years, which is a little bit, don't want to say that, it's kind of like that age thing. My company, Cosentini Construction, has built or remodeled over 500 homes in our area. My new company is New Earth Living, and that company mission is to build small urban eco-villages with a really, really strong intentionality around the social environment and very much having a very small carbon footprint. So, and then I also do this other thing called the Listening Workshop that's very much linked to the communities where we do work around listening, which actually isn't anything that you can think of conventionally. It's a different type of communication. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So I want to, can everybody see this, or should we turn the lights down a little bit? If that's at all possible. I have to say, I love this room. It's the coolest place. With that arch and everything, it's just the funnest building. Oh wow, that's a lot better. All right, so I don't have a clicker, so I'll do some type of gesture, and you guys will click to the next thing. And let me see if I can get out of the way. Are you? You're good. Okay.
I'll let you know.
All right. Thank you. So I'm asserting in what I'm creating that if we combine these 3 things, location or proximity. And that's proximity both in the environment that we put these houses and how we position the structures in these communities, with relationships, which is a gigantic arena that I'm trying to contextualize in one little word, which is really the social dynamic in any setting. You guys are very familiar with a very powerful social context that you all have at this church, right? Of acceptance and all those values that we bring. And then we bring some green technologies. I would assert that the green technologies usually are what fascinate people. They do fascinate me, and they're pretty much the easiest part. And we'll talk about those too.
So would you like to use this little?
Oh, that's fine.
Just press on the little clip.
Okay, I don't need that just yet, but yeah.
Don't aim it in your eyes.
Yeah. And then what we do is we put all those things together, and all of those things obviously are big areas. We get a new model for living. This is the old model. This is the standard suburban subdivision right here. You can see that we've got a huge amount of carbon footprint just by the size of these structures, and of course their lawns. Lawns take a gigantic amount of hydrocarbon to keep them the way that we like them. And then of course just the roads associated with the standard suburban model. And then this is a co-housing community, and that's their common house. So it's juxtaposing the 2 models that we sort of have in the past. So next click button, next slide. I think you just So this is just to kind of portray that after the war, the suburban land use model was obviously very desirable and was a great new land use modality, right? I mean, you had people that were living in tenements in the cities and they were sick of it. And it was time to move to the country and everybody wanted their own domain. And so that's sort of the birth of Levittown, which resulted in the suburban land use model. And what it results in is obviously everybody, what we're saying is everybody being in sort of separate consumptive units. And that results in a high, resource use. Should I wait for these guys to sit down? Wow, you guys are amazing. I love your...
You played your name up quite a bit.
You did? You played it up? Wow, that's exciting. I want to leave enough time, and I have not rehearsed this. I want to say that I thought there'd be 5 of you. I do apologize. Because I figured it wasn't that interesting. So we're going to leave enough time. I think it leaves plenty of time because I shortened this. This is a PowerPoint that some of it, we're part of an EPA Climate Showcase Communities grant, and so we've had to develop some PowerPoints for talks around. And this is really great. You're now going to be part of that outreach group, so thank you. That we have to report back to the EPA. So, right, everybody got into their own little house. These are the houses of that era, and everybody had their car that they drove back and forth, and then of course, we're all aware of how it resulted in many more cars. And you had to have your own dishwasher, and your own lawnmower, and your own this, and your own that, and it was really great. And it still is really great for the economy, and it was great for people wanting to have freedom and all that, and then get away from the tenements. And it's... Next slide, please. And this is sort of what is what it also results in. And it was a fix for its time, and now its time has passed, even without peak oil hitting us right now, right? So we got resource depletion. I mean, just by definition, right? Just by default, you're going to get resource depletion when you've got that. There was a study that a friend of mine did for her dissertation one time, and she determined that municipalities' viability is directly correlate to the number of roads that they have. Roads are really, really highly intensive in terms of the carbon footprint that they have and the expense that they take to maintain them. And so that's the suburban land use model. And of course, you've got things that just result out of that pure erosion, the failure of the soil to hold back the water, and then there's always that. Which, if you've lived in LA, everybody's familiar with it. So, next slide. Yeah, so consequence is peak oil, resource depletion, soil depletion, climate change, the lack of farmland, and critical materials being used up. And then, of course, everybody's aware of this. We're currently using in North America resources as if we had 5 planets. So, one of the things I kind of came up with to start to bring a new language frame to that is 5 to 1. That we're actually, my communities are intended to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% and resource use by 80%, just by virtue of bringing people together and bringing the houses close together, and of course the technologies that we impart. So that's a frame for that idea. So the next one. And what I've done is I've actually seized upon a gentleman, Ross Chapin. He is an architect in Langley, Washington, that's composed this idea called pocket neighborhoods. And he's looked at neighborhoods that he's created, but a lot of historical neighborhoods, and the value that they are by virtue of the way that they're composed in terms of the arrangement. And so his book is Pocket Neighborhoods, Creating Small-Scale Community in a Large-Scale World. And this is one of his communities, and we actually used this to image the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood before we built it. I did co-opt his language frame, Pocket Neighborhoods, with his permission. He loves to have this thing get propagated around the world. So, next slide. All right, so as you guys know, you may all know where the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood is. It's on Aurora Street. It's on the corner of Marshall and Aurora. And I had an empty lot next to my house, and in between my house and my commercial building that I owned. And I sat around ruminating on what to do there. And at first, as a builder, the first thing that came to mind was just a super highly state-of-the-art home, right? Make it really like maybe net zero, carbon neutral, all that kind of stuff, right? And then I realized that actually isn't the future. It isn't, once again, another isolated house, although it is in the urban environment. And I realized that I had these greater potential there to actually build a cooperative, a community of 4 homes on two parcels, my parcel that my house is on, and the one next door. And so I brought those together into one parcel, combined them, and put 3 new houses on it. Together with my house makes 4. And obviously, as you know from just being downtown, you've got access to so many different things. So by virtue of not having to get in our car, hardly at all, a lot of us, we reduce our vehicle miles traveled, which grossly reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and the houses are built in a manner that reduces it as well. So you have those 2 things combined together. But you can take the greenest house ever known to man, put it 20 miles out of town, and the piece of crap in town performs better because the vehicle miles traveled. So people are doing it all the time and claiming, this great sustainability measure, and it's actually not. 2 cars that far out of town, you're driving, that they average more than 2 times into town. So that high-performing house is not making up for your, well, maybe if you get a Tesla, but even a Tesla's pulling from the grid, right? So it's the urban environment, and more people want to live there. It's kind of cool. More and more people want to live in the urban environment now because they actually love the quality of life of walking. As the baby boomers age, increasingly don't want to be in their cars. And as you probably know, it is a pretty wonderful quality of life. So where we're located is there's the number 10 bus to Cornell. Walking to Cornell, I swear to God, takes 10 to 15 minutes from where we are when you go. I mean, it's, you want to bring your little wipes to wipe yourself off because it's straight uphill and everything. But it's still, and I know a lot of people that's their exercise. That's, professors that they want to live downtown and they walk every day up to campus and they don't get on the bus. And then, of course, located, from the Commons, which has, we don't need a common house at the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood because our common house is the Commons, where there's plenty of restaurants, and then and theater and all kinds of leisure activities, as well as very close to where a lot of people work. And then we highlight Gimme because Gimme is what we call a third place, what people call in architecture call a third place, and that's not your work, and it's not your home. It's a place you can get away from home, and it really is nice to have something like that to go to. We have that, and of course, other places, other cafes. And then, of course, what we've got in Ithaca is right in our backyards 2 amazingly beautiful waterfalls. So in addition to all these other things, we have this like natural beauty right nearby. So put all that together with the amenities, and you've got a huge reduction in your footprint, together with a really fun quality of life. Next slide. So this is just highlighting those things, right? You got the school, you have the amazing waterfall, you got downtown, you got Moosewood, the restaurants. That sort of is just images to show everything I just talked about. Next slide. So a big part of what we're entertaining is the connection between people, and to get the value that we're talking about. And it's what I'm bringing to the show is this idea of shared core values, which you sort of, I'm sure, have in the church. And when you bring that all together with developed communication skills like the listening workshop, you have sort of this unlimited possibility that we can't even predict being available. I mean, certainly you're just sharing everything. Last night, one of my people in the Pocket Neighborhood doesn't have a car, they use my car. So we're sharing a car. I've shared a car with 4 people before, and we just do it with Google on a calendar. You know, the internet makes that easy. So this is the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood right here, and those are just sort of random pictures. You know, this is showing carpooling, obviously. So, and working together makes everything easier. All we have to do is get calibrated as it relates to a communication structure so that you don't have, I mean, human beings sometimes are waiting to be offended, right? It's kind of like what we like to do. We like to be passive aggressive. And once you kind of filter that out, get that distinguished, everything moves a little smoother in terms of those relationships. You can imagine it's sort of the last frontier. All this stuff that we do in terms of the architecture and the building environment and the building envelope is kind of easy. It's the human being that's a little bit tough. Next slide. All right, so as it relates to the architecture of the houses, one of the things that's a prerequisite for these communities that absolutely is imperative is that you aggregate or arrange the public spaces of the houses around the common courtyard. Okay, so that's what fosters the spontaneous interaction, just the interaction that you're trying to create. So in all these houses, our kitchens are right around this courtyard. So you can look out into the courtyard, see if anybody's playing in the garden and that kind of thing if you want to participate. And usually in co-housing communities, you'll always make the parking, this is one chunk of parking, and then the other parking. In fact, what we do have at the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood is the parking's here, here, and here. And you have to walk through this to get to the houses. You want to try to create that normally so that they get out of their car. Although with us, we're coming on the street a lot. But even still, if we all are going to these entrances, we're walking through the common space. So that you foster spontaneous interaction and some level of connection by virtue of that. So that's always mandatory. Now in these houses, what we had to do was we had to make an entrance. On these houses, we have an entrance facing the courtyard. These houses have a face facing both the courtyard and the civic environment. It's not like you can turn your back on your general community. You definitely have to have a face going both ways, which is a little bit tricky in design. But it's a mandate. You can't put the back of the house to the city and put the face. That's one of the problems you'll notice with mutual housing down on whatever that is, 2nd Street. It has a face to the street and no face to the community. And they have a difficult time with their community. It's really, so you're really designing the built environment, the physical environment to foster and to support the social environment. The buildings are really about the people. And they're beautiful. I mean, they're really fun to live in too. All right, next slide.
Which of those was your original?
Yeah, click back to that one. This is the original house. It's somewhat arguably obvious because it's way too big. This house, yeah, that's a great question, thank you. This is the original house. This is my original house, and I had this empty lot here. And then these were, I should say, these were 2 barns, pretty dilapidated barns in the back. This is that alley, okay? There's an alley that bisects our block, as well as the block to the north of us. And that alley I believe it served a livery that was on the alley. There was an alley, I think there was a livery on the alley. And nobody really knows, because there's no other place except that other block that it happens in Ithaca. It's pretty unusual. And so we were able to do access from where we all now use the alley. This is a pedestrian walkway. As you see, this is the old driveway, and that's now a pedestrian walkway. And it's a fire access if it's needed.
Can I ask a
clarification?
So you said on the street, which is North Aurora, you have the openings, the front doors essentially, to the street for a facade-like type of thing, or do you use that? Because you said you go through the common space to get to the actual entrances that you use. Is that?
That's a great question. So sometimes in the wintertime, when nobody's out here, the front door, sometimes I use my front door in the summertime. Mostly I come in my mud entrance because it's so nasty. And Sharon, who lives here, she uses all of her entrances. If she parks back here where her parking space is, she comes through here. If she parks on the street, she comes through here probably. So it varies, but our spaces, that's sort of, I'm telling you, the vernacular, our space is so small, we're seeing each other anyway, you know. But in a bigger if you go to Eco Village, you'll notice their parking is very much on the periphery, and they have to go through that path to get to their units. So it's sort of like a design archetype, as opposed to it being imparted here exactly that way, just because we're in the civic environment, it's a little more difficult. Everything was different here than in many Eco Villages.
And how many people do you have in these 4 dwellings right now?
So I live here with my partner and 2 people that rent for me, or 1 person that rents for me and my daughter. This is a single person, couple with a child, 12-year-old couple with 2 little ones.
Okay, so there's about 10 people in that small area.
Yeah.
And that's great if you're, you know, you like all that noise, but there's a noise factor here, so how?
Human noise? No, we don't have much human noise.
You don't?
No.
Okay, so that's...
Well, I mean, if my daughter, who formerly, not too long ago was a teenager, has a big party out back, that's kind of noisy, but we talk to each other about that. If we have a party, everybody's invited, partially. I mean, not so much for the kids, but we'd let everybody know there'll be a party, and we, you know, it stops at a certain hour. You know, you just be respectful. But I don't have any noise related to people just living, hardly any. They shovel walks, I hear that. That's good. No, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, there's no like noise from people just coming and going. And we're not living any closer together than any of the houses in the Fall Creek, by the way.
Yeah, I see that.
This is not how they are. I'm sorry about the slide. I went through a lot of iterations before they ended on what I actually built. This was a triplex. I then pulled this apart, dropped it to the ground. They were elevated above garages. And this is 2 little cottages, one here and one here. They're adorable. And I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. The one here and the one here are mirror images of each other, and they're 1,350 square feet. And these buildings, these 2 in the back, are not full second stories, which is sort of a part of this as well. You know, you're trying to get that sense of it being a community, and so you don't have these towering structures, and we're going to keep that going forward. And that's a little bit tricky thing in design to do. Well, what was I going to say? So these 2 are 1,350 square feet in the back. This one's 1,550, and my house is 2,400, and it's a fossil fuel hog. These hardly use any fuel at all. And I mean, they're air source heat pumps, and we'll talk about that. But I did try to increase the performance of this building, but it doesn't perform like that. What we do for our common house is, because my house is oversized, it eventually probably go to a family with more kids than I have. Is we have our community meals in my house because I have a bigger space, or we have an insurance house who has a bigger space. So we don't really need a common house because we have a sort of existing house on this property that accommodates for that. In Eco Villages, the houses are like in Eco Village's 3rd neighborhood. Their structures are only 1,000 square feet, so they kind of need a common house for community events. All right, so next slide. I kind of shortened that. And one of the things that you build in is shared spaces, whatever it be, for hanging out, for gardening, and obviously the walkways are all shared. And it's about that passageway, that journey, that the level of connectivity that's created out of that, as well as making it just really enhancing and beautiful. It's much nicer than walking down the street of a suburban land use and having a car drive by. And keeping the cars at the periphery is a big part of this. Keeping the cars corralled and away from the play space and the community space. Okay, next slide. So when I did it, that wasn't there. So I got a little beta run. Thank you for being my beta tester. That's the word vibrancy. Obviously, I shortened that box. The box, yeah. So
text box.
Oh, look, that happened with this one too. Wow. That's fine. You get the gist of it. So the social dynamic is going to be co-created with the residents, and it's the process is going to start when people show an interest in a community. So they'll just find it on the internet, and they'll start to get immersed in each other's lives by virtue of sharing their lives, really just sort of telling their story. And then we'll move forward in potentially co-creating what we assert is the shared values of the community. And those can be any myriad of things. These sort of describe some of those. You could imagine that these communities can be very much revolve around health, because we can grow our own food, we're going to be walking. They've determined, as you may know, that the fountain of youth is gossip. Well-meaning gossip, not gossip where you actually diminish someone to someone else, but gossip like, oh, how's your daughter doing? I heard she got into college. Tell me more about that. That type of interaction, studies have proven to be very, very much an enhancement of your longevity and keeps you young to have that type of immersion in your life, that possibility and opportunity to talk like that. And sometimes it gets gossipy. You probably have heard of that study of that Italian community in Pennsylvania, Restoria study. It was done in Rosetto, thank you. Thank you. Rosetto. This guy who was studying heart conditions found this community, about 1,700 people, had no incidents of cardiac anything. And he was mystified, completely mystified. So he went there and he figured, they must have really bad, they had no incidents of heart conditions. Oh, right, so he went there and he was like, oh, they eat really, really well. They must not eat any fat foods. It's an old Italian community. They were substituting lard for olive oil. Not true. So then he said, they must have jobs that, are just like no stress, right? No, they were all like hard labor, And then he said, genetically, they have to be superior human beings, right? No, genetically, they're Italians. No, genetically, nothing great there. So then he was like, what is going on? And he hung out with them. He found out every night after their grappa, they would go out and walk around the neighborhood and just gossip their heads off. Just shoot the breeze. And, in Italian communities, you got to have a little bit of a thick skin because you're going to get a ribbing, And they just would really share their lives with each other over their porches. And 30 years later, indeed, they started to show up. After the advent of the internet, and heavy television use, they weren't communing with each other, and of course then it started to arise in their community. So, and other studies have proven this. So, gossiping, I love that I get to see that. Gossiping is the fountain of youth, it turns out, and we're going to foster gossiping without diminishing the listening of anybody. So that's a piece of it. Core values, shared values. If we all assert that who we are is about self-expression, fun, and ease, that puts a context or a frame around our community, and now a lot of issues can be resolved because who we say we are is not our ego. Who we say we are these shared values that we've chosen together. And as soon as we can get you separated from your ego, it's a whole different world. At least that's what I say. All right, next slide. All right, so here's the technology one that we want to. So, the single biggest piece of technology that we have in these structures now and anybody, it's sort of called, everybody talks about the smart house. Dumb house, that's what we're building. It's a dumb house in that it's not more smart, although it is highly technical, don't let me kid you. The biggest part about these houses is a thermal envelope. We put a very big thermal envelope around them. So that means that it's just a really tight house, okay? So that's what this is depicting. Many times that wall depth is much thicker. You may have seen Straubel houses and other houses built with passive house technology, and it can be 16 inches thick. We did our own wall assembly. The main piece, one of the biggest shifts in the building assembly from convention is this. There is no thermal bridging. So the frame of the building is prevented from being in contact with the outside. So you have a thermal envelope that runs all the way around. And on my houses, it goes all the way from we have 7-foot basements in those houses, which is unusual. We won't be doing that again. They're too expensive. And they're gone by the wayside. Basements are going away because they're stupid spaces. You have to condition them, or you not condition them, they're just going. You're also not intentional. We had to do basements in the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood because those houses all have to be elevated. That's primarily because that's what the built environment is. But the biggest part is the social dynamic of if I walk by you on the street and you're not elevated while you're sitting at your table, that's weird. You know, and you know that building on State Street that Mr. Rockavelli just built, that apartment building, where he put everything down on the ground, and those people are now living. Now you walk by and you're like, hey, how's dinner tonight? You know, and that just doesn't work. So we had to elevate them, so that meant we had no basements in them. Other places that won't be the case. So this thermal envelope wraps around the studs, the framing, and over the rafters. So my buildings are outperforming Passive House. They're at 0.4 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. That's a technical term. That means you put pressure on the building. How much air leaks out per hour is that metric. So that's the biggest thing. And then after that, it's bringing oxygen in. So you literally have to bring air into the buildings because they're so tight. And then we're using this. This is the Mitsubishi Hyperheat Mini Split Air Source Heat Pump. And what that means is it's sucking heat out of the air. You've heard of ground source heat pumps, geothermal. This isn't that. We thought about that. This is sucking heat out of the air and extracting it, condensing it, and putting it into the house. These work both ways. They produce heat and they produce air conditioning. What we did with this is we put so much money into our thermal envelope. This is what most green builders are doing now. You put so much money into your thermal envelope that you try to reduce your heat plant costs. And in fact, passive houses hardly require any heat at all. The full certified passive houses. We have a pretty difficult climate zone. We have one of the most difficult climate. You go just a little bit south or a little bit closer to the ocean, it's quite a bit. We have a tough one, right? Because we have a high vapor content, and we have those huge swings in temperature. So it's kind of a tricky. This is probably the trickiest zone there is. And then we got photovoltaics. One house has them on it, and we thought it was at 65% of its base electric load. Because these are electric. They are high performing though. They have a much higher efficiency than resistance electric heat. We thought this house was going to be performing at 65%, but we think it's hitting 100. They're really careful with their lights though. They're careful with their computers, but they turn their lights on. But we have to wait to see. We'll be looking at their, obviously their, utility bill. So these guys are definitely a big part of the equation. If it wasn't for Mitsubishi coming out with this does perform at 80% efficiency down to 0 degrees. So that's pretty high performing. That's why we use those. That's pretty much, you'll see those in the green building industry now ongoingly, pretty much everybody using that. We are hoping though on our next project where we have 27 homes, we're thinking about using a biomass, a district system biomass, because of the initiative in New York State. And it'll have a cogen ability. It'll produce some electricity from turbines. But for this project, these are little, they're in the city, they work good. And then this is a triple pane window. My houses have Paradigm triple pane windows. They're very high performing.
So could you ask, what's your mechanism to heat hot waters?
Oh, great question. It's just a standard electric hot water heater. I should have said the hot water part, which we super insulated. So that's basically a hot water tank is a storage tank, right? And the longer you can keep that temperature, the less you're using fuel to get your hot water. So we super insulated it because we use SPF. We use spray foam in our buildings, 2-pound spray foam, and I had the guy spray the. You have no idea how much research I did for this. I evaluated all different types of water heat, not the least of which being an air source system, because this performs 30% better than resistance electric. But what we settled on was super insulating the tank, because you know, you're always measuring cost-benefit ratio on things. You could go to the highly technical thing, and then you're spending $20,000 on something, and when I just realized, well, $150 and spray these tanks.
Is there a reason that you didn't use a tankless hot water system?
That's tankless hot water. You mean like the like a Tuskegee or a
Right.
Yeah, they're actually really high electricity. They're what's that? A myth. They've become a myth in the green building. In other words, everybody's like, why don't you use the tankless? Because that performs better, and it doesn't. When it does demand, when you do use, it flash dries water, and it pulls such a huge amount of amperage that when you weigh that out over time, it actually is a high performer over the storage tank concept. The only thing better that I could have done was add a tempering tank to mine, because the water comes in at 40 degrees, and it would be nice to temper it before it goes into my hyper storage thing, but I didn't do that. I'm asserting that they don't
I think
use
you'll
all their
build
water.
more houses, you could do that next time.
Yeah, well, this is a moving target. All this stuff is moving all the time. It's amazing how much the industry is shifting under your feet. I mean, just all the time. I was going to put solar thermal on these buildings, only to discover that they're inefficient compared to the air source heat pumps. They're not using air source heat pumps to heat domestic hot water.
Is that and those are along the baseboard, or do you have?
They're not.
In the floor? Or?
That's a great question. I should have showed it here. They have an air handler. That's why they're called splits. They have an air handler on the wall inside, so they just blow air.
So it's pulling from the bottom and then coming out the top?
It's pulling from wherever this is located on the outside of the house, and then it distributes it inside with two different heads, just two heads, one upstairs and one downstairs. So you have to leave your bedroom doors open.
I wanna move away from this old house.
Oh, that's right. We're getting late. We're almost done now.
There's a lot of excitement, but I think some interesting questions are: were there code problems to deal with? How do you deal with the city? Were there? Sue and I talked about it. And Phoebe Brown, who we remember was here December 1st, raised the issue about where's the black folks in this neighborhood? How's the affordability model work? So there's some policy issues that I think are really valuable for us to get exposed to.
That's what Brett wants to talk about. He doesn't want to talk about technology.
I do. I'm the hottest technology.
It's great.
You have some information, I think, on these other areas that is really cutting edge stuff that we need to hear about.
I'll come to the topic. And then the other piece of green technology, of course, is compost. And then this is representative of something we didn't bring to the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood, which is a forest garden, which is a three-dimensional landscape, edible landscape, basically. We have some of that. So that's about it. And water collection, we're going to be doing water collection. So this is to indicate the edible landscape that we are doing. So what's the next one? This is all Mr. T. Okay, so this is the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood. Those are just pictures of it done. This is the cottage in the back where you can see it. This is my house, the front house. This is looking down from a little down. I love this.
It's nice.
This is a master composter event. And those are the two rear cottages. That's it. Nice picture. Thank you.
Nice colors.
Pretty good. I'm very proud of it. All right, we can go to the next one, which I think is the ending slide. Oh, and this shows some concepts for the next community that we're doing on 5 Mile Drive. And those are just existing. We're doing a couple of different pockets.
Is that newly proposed or under construction?
We're going through the approval process now. Next slide.
The interesting thing on that slide, I think, and you can go on Sue's website and get more information, but the city actually agreed to sell you some land from the city to make the size of this lot work out, right? The size of this.
Well, they haven't agreed yet.
I thought they passed through.
No, they'd like us to take it. I mean, but they still have to go through the sealed bid. There's another parcel right here. This is the railroad tracks, and the inlet is down here. There's another little parcel right here. It's landlocked for them. They'd be well served to sell it to us, but I still have to do that.
What's the walking time from here to, say, across the river and
Like team or
you can go across the railroad tracks, across the Black Diamond Trail once they put the bridge in. And right now you can cross the railroad bridge and get to Cherry Street in the fire.
Oh, I see.
I have a question on what your ownership model is.
Yep. So we can kill this and turn the lights on if you want. This is all the websites. I have my cards in the back. You guys can grab it.
So can you talk about the costs that, are
So this, I'll answer your question.
Ownership model.
Yeah, great question. Ownership model. That's the okay. So for the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood, it is a co-op. So what that means is the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood is a co-op. It owns the houses. The people that live in the houses have a proprietary lease, so they have shares in that cooperative corporation, and so they're the officers of the corporation, and then they have a proprietary lease that the corporation gives them for their house. It's like ownership, only you are, what it does is it really fosters people coming together to make choices together. That's why a cooperative is many times chosen, because it does mean that you've got to be in relationship to each other for so many decisions and conversations. And that's what that means. So you have what's called a proprietary lease, and we have bylaws and house rules. And it does allow a couple of cool things. It allows that we only had to tap the water and the sewer once, because it's one owner. And a tap for the water and the sewer costs $1,500, so that's kind of cool. The other thing that it did do, it has done, and please don't tell anybody this, I need to change this in New York State, it gave us a little tiny bit of a break on our taxes, because we're taxed on the basis of it being a rental, because it's a single owner, leasing something out. So it's a little bit different than home ownership. It primarily is so that we could aggregate the parcels into one owner. That is one of the things that allowed us to do what we did on the site, have 4 houses, 2 in back of the front, because of the cooperative land use model that we imparted to the equation here. And then there could have been other cool things that I did investigate that I thought about, and that could have been the district heat system, right? Because it's a single owner, you could have the owner own that district system. And that's, of course, a real synergistic, could provide some serious benefit. We hope to have that and enjoy that benefit on the next project of the district heat plant. Because now I can take my heat plant, not put it in the house, put it somewhere else, and have that aggregated cost. You know, right? So your standard heat system in a house, of a boiler, is $16,000, right? I mean, it runs the gamut. But if I can take that cost, call it $10,000, put it into one plant, that may get some incentives too. And now we can reduce our house costs. The biggest trick in land and building houses is keeping the cost down. You know, right? I mean, it's just crazy expensive to build new construction. And that's not always the labor. Labor costs actually haven't gone up in 25 years, I swear to God. It's the materials and just all the infrastructure that goes into it. And most of it's buried, you don't even think of it. When people call me and ask about a new house, and I say $200 a square foot, they're mortified. But that's the driveway, that's the water, that's the sewer, that's a whole bunch of stuff that is associated with your comfort. That isn't the sticks and the bricks, and people forget about all that. So that's the land use on that, on a cooperative. That's exactly like EVI, Eco Village of Ithaca. We stole all their documents. You know, didn't steal, they gave it to us. They've been very supportive. Liz Walker's very much been a mentor of mine in this whole process. And you know, we used their documents, we used Bill Goodman, their lawyer, and we just shrunk it all down, right? Because there's only 4 of us. There's a whole bunch of things. There's a whole bunch of things that we didn't have to bring to bear because we are just 4 people. So it doesn't have to be quite as onerous. You know, it's so much easier to manage. You're like, hey, how about you clean up your dog poop? I just had dinner with you last night. You know, so you're going to do stuff like that. There doesn't have to be as much of the sort of regulations that you have to do when you have a bigger community. It's more like an extended family. So let me answer your
about financing. How did you finance the
Yeah. This was financed very, very simply. Co-housing communities can't only be done this way. We did this because there was only 4. It was very simple. I had plans. People went and liked it, decided they wanted in, and went and got financing from banks. and I built it as Cosentini Construction, so it's a standard new construction process. They got construction financing, and construction financing looks like this. You go to the bank and they say, yeah, we'll do that. Who's your builder? Oh, they're approved, fine. And then they meter out the money based on milestones on the construction project. You pay a little bit higher interest rate because construction financing banks consider more risky. And then you convert to a standard mortgage, and your rate goes to a capped rate, your fixed rate that you may have gotten for your mortgage. So it's like buying a new home, only it gets bought over time. And but we did it simply like that. Cooperatives and co-housing, though, most, I don't know, if it was a bigger project, you usually require financing up front. EVI's third village, Tree Neighborhood, is being financed by CFCU. So they give you a giant chunk of money and you build it out. They're building that with what's called a joint venture. A group of people together is who's doing that. The residents are the general contractor on that one. So the financing is one of the trickiest parts of all this stuff. It always is. Yeah.
So this may be a question for later discussion, but coming from the perspective of community, which is most important, as you said, but wanting the community to be mixed community, what are the strategic options for doing this so that you can have mixed folks in that?
Yeah, and that's really where the rubber hits the road, because so much in co-housing ends up being affluent getters, no question about it, and Eco Village is definitely testament to that. So that's where, if we could crack the code on that, I would, and I've been working on it. What we did get one house in the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood that did get some grant funding, and met 80% of median income, and those people qualified, and they're living there now. And how we did that was we applied for grants, lots of them, and we got a couple. And then they did a bunch of stuff. They did their own painting. They found their cabinets from Craigslist. They found their tile from Craigslist. So, and a lot of their floors are not done. Like they don't have floor, and they have the subfloor in some of the rooms of their house. So that was a hybrid method of doing it, and we could do it because a lot of builders probably would stand for that, and a lot of banks wouldn't stand for that because without the finishes, they don't like to finance it. So I'm now working. There's a so you have to you have to use all the subsidies there are, all the agencies out there. You try to bring them to bear on the project, and they don't play many times unless there's enough there for them. It's sort of like when I started that project, I went and talked to Paul Mazzarella at 3 Neighborhood Housing because I really didn't want to create just another gentrified. Fall Creek's already become, when I was a kid, it was all blue collar. It's sad to me to see it just go gentry. And I sat with Paul, and he goes, no way, it's way too small. It's like, I can't get involved because the regulations associated with subsidized housing are insane. You're submitting documents every other week saying, testifying to that you have met the metrics that was the grant's criteria. So you're constantly engaging in substantiation of what it is, amongst other things. So it was much too small for them to be involved. But that's how you do it. You partner with people like that. That's how the community part, the county parcel that's being built up by the Biggs building, they're partnering. There's a developer and Better Housing. I think are coming together. Yeah.
I work here.
Yeah, they're coming together, right, to make that happen.
Yeah.
Breckenridge, I think, is Breckenridge right down, on King Street. I think that's a partnership. So the next project I'm doing, I'm trying to partner with I'm trying to have a gentleman and his wife. His name is Jerome Garciano. He's a lawyer. His wife is a doctor. They wanted to get into a co-housing community and couldn't afford it. Where they live in Washington, and they were like, they were just incensed and a little bit stupefied. And so he formed this gentleman Jerome formed this not-for-profit called the Partnership for Affordable Co-Housing, PFAC. And he's working really, really hard to make co-housing affordable by having the joint ventures and the people that are interested in co-housing have access to all this subsidized money from whoever, the government, HUD. Because that's the way you got to do it. You got to bring free money in to make the houses drop in what it costs to build them, so you can sell them or rent them at a lower value. You'll notice everywhere down here when people build rental, many times they get a pilot. They get an exemption from their taxes, because when you impart the taxes to any rental property in the city, it's got to go market rate, and it's even hard to make it go market rate because the taxes are so high. So you got to get abatements. You get abatements from taxes. You get subsidizations, and that's how it works. It's all about partnerships. Now, having said that, there are places where co-housing has been done, and it's a Robin Hood model. On Martha's Vineyard, there's a gentleman that I'm familiar with. People subsidize the affordable houses. The affluent residents literally pay for other houses to be built. That's because they want their pools to be cleaned. They need to have the worker bees. So they'll actually pay for those houses to be built.
And their fire department staffed, and the postal delivery people there, and teachers as well. There's a whole set of things that you want in the community. That's a great model because it's a closed, you can't live on the Cape and be a postal delivery person on Vineyard very easily, so you really got to build it there.
Right, and that's a mountain something company. And then Eagle Village actually has a bit of that. A bunch of people helped other people get in there when their costs began to elevate. So there's that, which I think is really cool, because you guys know, I mean, all of we just moved a huge, money is now residing in such a smaller percentage of the population, so pulling that back out and having it be available for others. But my next project, I do hope to use PFAC to get affordability to be part of it. And it's definitely tough.
Let me make one context statement here, and we're getting close to finishing. When Bob and I and Angela and Sharon talk about these discussions, we want to bring stuff here that if you just came to this 9 o'clock session, would be interesting, informative, and help you have more knowledge about the area. Maybe to influence your alderman or your congressman. But we also want to think about the context of indicators. What's an indicator or a set of indicators we should be using in the community around this issue that we could measure ourselves? Are there sets of measures like percent of affordable housing in Ithaca City, Ithaca Town, Tompkins County? What kind of indicators are there? What should we have? And the second is, we could walk out of here and not do anything at all and still be benefited by being more knowledgeable. But is there an action item that we as individuals want to start to take, or we as a church want to take, or we as the care committee wants to take? So the context of these things is, let's keep that in our minds. Not a requirement, but let's be thoughtful about that.
Yeah.
So the co-op model is a fascinating history, which is for wealthy people in New York City to separate themselves from other people. But one of the the kind of stories about that always is there's a co-op board. You have to interview. So Donna can't live in the buildings we don't want. Donna, we don't want the press, and so we don't want. It's an easy way of excluding people, but that's how it's been used. I'm curious about how you wrote your bylaws. So when you transfer, when the first person moves out, how are you going to select the next person? And for the bigger one, once you get bigger, is that a mechanism for, how do you avoid it being a mechanism for hallucinating? So that's what the co-op, even when it's low income or even when it's rural, every co-housing I've ever seen is homogeneous. Now that might not be a problem.
Yeah.
But we want to live with life, right? That's what people do. But I'm just curious how your experience in terms of constructing that so that it's how do you that kind of co-op bylaws?
Yeah, that's good. So I should have said that. One of the primary distinctions between a cooperative and a homeowners association, an HOA, which is how you bring people together, those two things are, with an HOA, I sell my house, I don't have to introduce you to the new buyers. I just sell my house and new buyers move in and figure it out on your own. In a co-op, I've got to bring you the buyer, and if we're all in a co-op together, I'd bring them to dinner and you get to meet the new buyers, and you'd actually get to say whether they get in or not, just as you'd illuminated. And in the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood, that's exactly what it is. We have to bring our new buyers to the 3 other members, and they get to have a say. One of the things, so that is exclusionary. And that's the primary, that would probably be where the rubber really hits the road, is really the difference between this and anything else, and that you get to say. The other part is, you are by default in communication with these people. You can't not be, you got to participate because it's in kind of the legal structure. So how do you get away from the homeowner? Now one has to acknowledge that there's a huge amount of self-selection that goes on. It's not like you register into this without being somebody who's interested in sustainability and somebody who wants to be in a relationship with others. So there's a piece of that. So as soon as you say, hey, I'd like to think about this, you've already self-selected. I would love to not have homogeneity. How do you say that? Homogeneity. Yeah, I know. I think so. Because I think it's boring as anything. I mean, I just think it's a boring way to live. I think that multi-dimensionality in human being is just way more exciting, way more interesting, and diversity can result in so much more possibility than a mono. I mean, it's right. We can map onto this agriculture. We can map onto this ecological systems. Monocultures destroy the environment in some respects, because they just suck all the resources out of the room. But when we get diversity, we get much more of a vibrant culture. So how to foster a culture like this? On my next project, it is not going to be a cooperative, interestingly enough, because I can't, I wanted it to be a cooperative, but I can't get past the financial and legal hurdles associated with that. And that's a long story about the legal crap, the legal process associated with building things where people have shared assemblies or structures or spaces. That has a very, very somewhat onerous legal process, because the Attorney General doesn't like that very much, because there's been con artists that say, yeah, we're going to build a swimming pool, yeah, we're going to, oh yeah, you're going to have a swimming pool, yeah, and you move in and there's no swimming pool and they're gone. So the Attorney General has a pretty onerous process, and that process has limited me to the next project being an HOA, which interestingly enough could result in less homogeneity. Now, that's a lot I'm trying to create through this social context that we're going to build together with the residents, that by virtue of having that in place, it's almost like there's a machine that the people go through in order that they don't have to feel like they have to be limiting to live together. So if we can create a shared core value structure together, now we've got a structure where we can say, hey, the Quakers do this. The Quakers have this. Their core values are care, respect, and trust. And they map everything onto that backdrop, in a way. So wait a minute. So you were there when we agreed that who we are is about fun, play, and ease. Let's say they selected those, right? So, is that what you're being right now? And so you can hopefully have a structure where you don't have to worry about where the person's background is when they come into your community. And that's not how co-ops are, you're right. And I don't know, I'm figuring out as I go.
I definitely don't know either. I just know that the long history of that, of any kind of, well, there's a cliche maybe in sociology that there's no such thing as a chosen community. There's only communities of need.
There's only communities
of need. If you choose something, right? If you have the choice, that's communities are codependent, like literally, not by choice. So and so how you produce a community how do you generate a community of need? That's my question, is what's the structure for that? What's the legal structure? What's the social structure? It's been tried many times. And my experience, or for what I understand of the situation, it's always it's producing it is okay, it's when it turns over, that's the problem.
Can I suggest?
So we have to keep the houses that are affordable that way forever, in perpetuity. You could,
There's some, or think about some of them.
Can I suggest it's a good time to, there's a good question to continue. Fred, you got the chart there. Would it be possible to collect some questions that we can take to the 12:15 discussion? Do you want to?
Sure. I'd be glad
So
to.
we want to continue the discussion, so if there are some questions.
That's a great place to start.
I think that's a great place to start.
Chosen community versus need, or
Community of need. It's not.
when you say need, you kind of mean I live in this house because it's low enough for me to.
Because there's other Italians who speak Italian next to me, because otherwise I would not
I wouldn't
be, if I lived somewhere else, like how would I even know how to buy groceries, right? So when immigrants come to a certain place, they come because it's affordable,
Right.
but also because there's other people there who, it's not just because they feel comfortable, it's because it's literally a function. They need the function. Right? It's not it's not just I'm afraid of somebody else. It's like I need you to help me find a job. So of course I'm going to look next to you. It's a very different mentality.
You said we have to be,
that's great.
Jennifer Wapinski-Moradian is going to be here in 8 minutes to set up for the next thing. Let's jot down as many as we can.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being so interested.